at the Perfect Lap Podcast, we're happy to introduce Whoosh Bespoke Wheels as a sponsor of the show. Whoosh Bespoke was born out of necessity. Their race team struggled to find wheels that offer the perfect fit, strength, durability, and that big old thing, a reasonable price. The people behind Whoosh Bespoke are racers and engineers seeking engineering excellence, and they offer precision forged wheels crafted by racers for racers, with a product lineup that includes a wide range of options from monoblock to modular wheels, including 2- and 3-piece wheel designs. All engineered from the finest materials, although they do primarily use 6061 T6 forged aluminum, but they do offer things as high of quality as a magnesium alloy. So this really can work for any setup you're trying to go for. Customization is at the heart of what they do at Whoosh Bespoke. You can tailor your wheels with custom sizes, offsets, finishes, and even options like custom lettering, adding two-tones. Their colors include both standard and premium finishes, as well as special finishes like brushed, hand-polished, and even paint to sample. Every set of wheels produced exceeds the JWL standards and meets the rigorous WCEC quality standards, and they are tested by real people with real cars racing all around the world. And guess what? Me and Kilgore, we're also going to be part of that team. So we're going to be putting these things to the test. We're putting them on our cars. Kilgore's going to be repping out and going through all the time attack season. I'm going to be beating them up at HPDE days and just having a good time with them. So I want you to go take a look at them and make sure you give them a follow on all their socials. It's whooshautomotive.com, Whoosh Automotive on all the socials. Go check them out. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Perfect Lap Podcast. I'm Mark Jager. This is Mark Kilgore. He goes by Kilgore. I go by Jager. Today, we're going to be talking about sponsorships in time attack. All righty, Kilgore, let's jump right into it. Sponsorships, partnerships, whatever you want to call them, they're still the same thing. It's just a different word, synonymous with all the good stuff. So let's first go by defining what is a sponsorship or a partnership. We're just going to call it sponsorship the rest of the episode, by the way. What does a sponsorship mean to Kilgore?
Well, everybody wants it. You know, we all want that sponsorship. But that is a good question, which is, well, what is it that you want, and what does the sponsor want out of it, right? And I think it can mean a number of things, and it may depend on where you are in your motorsports journey. One thing that you will probably hear if you talk to people who are sponsors or people who have worked with sponsors, do not think that probably for the majority of us, especially those who are listening to this Time Attack podcast, that you're going to be getting just cold, hard cash. That is something that is always super difficult to really obtain. Right? So I think for the majority of us, you know, what a sponsorship is a is a partnership. Well, what does that mean, right? Is a partnership where I may be getting a discount on parts. I may be getting free parts, and I may be helping you develop parts, you being the sponsor. I may be helping develop some parts, or you come out with, maybe you're a brake company and you come out with a new compound and you think, you know, okay, let's see how this is working. We want to send these to you, and you give them a test and see what you think. Give us some feedback. That could be what you're looking for. I think for me, it's this partnership where I am going to bring something to the table. The sponsor is going to bring something to the table, and we want to mutually benefit each other. How about yourself? What do you think? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong?
I mean, I think at the very end there, you're on exactly the right track. I mean, mutually beneficial partnership, agreement, whatever you want to call it, that's what it's all about. Like, when a company and a team or a driver or whatever you want to call it gets together, the big thing that we're really looking at here is how can we be mutually beneficial to each other, whether that be the media portion, getting the name out there of a product, getting a new product to the market, helping design or build said product so that it fits and actually works how the sponsor wants it to. I think all of those things come to play, and that's where it gets really interesting. Is it should be a give and take, take, give, take, all those things, because that's what it's supposed to be. That's something I think that many people fail on, because they have this wild thought in their head that a sponsorship is as you depicted in the very beginning, right? How many sponsorships are you going to get where it's like, hey, here's $10,000, slap our name on the side and roll on, do whatever you feel. You're not going to get many of those. That's not going to happen.
That's right.
But what's going to happen is you're going to get, hey, X, I'm wearing an AEM shirt, so I'll throw it out there. AEM says, hey, we have an intake. We'd like, at that juncture, you might contact them. They might contact you. You say, we have a goal that we're trying to get to. We want to get X market share of this style of automobile, right? So my case, Mustang. Hey, we're trying to grow our Mustang market share with our intakes. So we want to get it on your car. We want to get our logo on the side of your car. We want pictures and videos and progress reports of how it's running and how much power it gained. And we need all this information from you. And then this is where it gets really interesting. This is the mutual beneficial portion of it. Well, like you stated, so what does that mean? So they're going to ask a lot of you in terms of, we're going to give you an intake. Now, what does that mean? Does that just mean they're going to give you an intake and you run loose and throw some stickers on your car? Or do you have to give back all those things that they asked for? Photos from events, event recaps, how much horsepower that it made, what's the IATs that it's now producing, is it better or worse than stock? You're going to have to go to track days and swap it mid-track day, all those things, right? So it's that give and take that really, really makes the difference between like a sponsorship and something that's not real per se. And I think
you just mentioned, let me jump in.
Beneficial. Go for it.
Yeah, let me jump in there, because you mentioned something right there that made me kind of, it brought a thought to my mind, which is, you may get a sponsorship, you may get some product, or you may get a discount on some product, and the sponsor may not necessarily, they may say, okay, great, send us some stuff if you can, it sort of depends on what their requirements are, right? And we can talk a little bit later about some of those requirements. But to your point of, you were saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to give reports, you need to kind of give updates, how are things going, changes maybe you think could make the product better, some actual data, right? Some real world data. Hey, here's what I'm finding. That they may not necessarily require that of you as the driver, but that is something that you should seriously think about doing or considering, because that could provide a lot of value to the sponsor, and that when it comes around the next year or the next couple of years later, and they're thinking, okay, do we still want to sponsor this driver, right? Maybe they do want to sponsor you, and maybe they're even like, hey, he or she's been doing really well for us. Actually, we're wanting to bump you up. Like, a lot of these companies may have tiers in terms of what the sponsorship levels are, and they may say, hey, we want to bump you up to another tier. So that's something that you made me think about in terms of everything that you have to do. And maybe it's something that you don't have to do, but it's still something you should do, so that you can make sure that you're giving and you're standing out. You're giving everything you can to the sponsor, and you're standing out from some of the other sponsor or people who are sponsored.
100% agree. And that's where, people really, this is where we talked about professionalism in our previous episode, right? And this is where you can take that professionalism and lay it into these sponsorships, right? Make
Absolutely.
that into something that is something that can really bring value to your team, to yourself, to the sponsor. And as you stated, right, you might end up, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but you might get a sponsorship where they only give you a 10% discount on, let's say you're buying brake pads. They give you a 10% discount. Well, if you know you're going to buy a bunch of brake pads, 10% still can be a good cost savings, so it might be worth it to you. But on the flip side of that, if you get a 10% discount and you give tons of feedback and photos and media and stuff that they can use on their marketing team, they're going to start seeing you as this asset. Because I guarantee you, there is some POS guy that's sponsored by this same company that ain't giving nothing. And at the end of the day, they're going to be looking at his value versus your value and going, look how much more we're getting from this guy. Let's bump this up. Let's get him as a larger part of our media team or our partnership agreements or whatever they want to call it, right? And that's going to be that big motivating factor for them to pull you in, and maybe now you get 20%. Maybe they give you free stuff now. So you really have to consider those options as you go forward. And I'm going to tell you right now, it all comes down to a few things. How broke are you? How well off you are, because I'll admit, right, if you're making $1 million a year and you're time attack racing and you're having a good time doing it, you might not need anybody to help you out. It might not be something that you even care about. But for most of us, it's a situation where you need help wherever you can get it, because driving to events is expensive. Signing up for events is expensive, not as expensive as building the car or any of those things. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but it's one of those situations where we have to find ways to cut costs. And if a sponsor can help us cut those costs, then that's amazing. As you stated before, likelihood of somebody throwing a bunch of cash at you, not very likely. But it can happen. So let me ask you this. Is it important to find the right sponsor for you and your team?
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. And it can be so hard for drivers, especially when they're starting out, right? Like, you start to get some interest from a sponsor, and it's right, like it's the first one, and you're like, I don't care who it is. Like they're interested in helping me out, and I want to take it, right? Like, and starting out, like that may help, and it may, as you said, it may free up some money in other areas that you would not otherwise have, which can be great. However, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, there can be some downsides to sponsorships, and you definitely need to find the right sponsor. And I think a lot of that goes into finding a sponsorship, a company that you really work well with. Because if you have a good relationship with that sponsor, that sponsorship is going to be more fruitful than one where, like you don't really like their parts. You don't even like, right? Like, you don't want to get a part that you don't like or that you don't believe in, or one that is worse performing than something else. If you're going to have a part on your car,
one of the worst factors when it comes to sponsorship is if you stated it very well, if you get a part you don't believe in, if you get a part that performs worse than your previous part that you paid for. All throughout my time attack racing, I always said to myself, any sponsor I get, I need to believe in their parts. Now, I can be stupid. Sure. I can actually be a moron. I'm not an engineer. I'm nothing of the sort. So I could easily get something that is promised to the moon, and I just don't know anything different. So there's always going to be those times where, you could get something that could, in fact, be worse. But I think that, like you stated, we have to, as drivers, as teams, we have to at least believe. Because when I try to sell this product to anybody who's caring about anything I'm doing on social media or in person or whatever the case may be, I need to be able to say, hey, I use this oil because I think it's good. I think it provides me a better layer of protection than the next guy, or at least comparable. Like, I'm using it because I believe it actually is a good oil. And, you know, there could be somebody that could be this just as good, but I believe that this is, for me, the best that I can get. So I definitely
you're absolutely right.
Some interesting facts there and I think as we kind of state, when I say right sponsor, I guess that's kind of like a misnomer there. I should say it has to fit right with your program, with what you're going after. You know, you have a BMW. If you decided to throw on, I don't know, name any Japanese brand coilover from back in the day and be like, I put these on my BMW, people are going to kind of look at you like, how come it's not some sort of Euro blah, 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 right? There's going to be some weird expectations there of this doesn't quite make any sense. So there has to be some sort of like understanding and meshing of, you know, what the situation may be.
Well, to your point, I think that also kind of gets into, right, the sponsor sort of being a right fit for whatever it is that you're doing. Right, you know, are they wanting to get, especially for time attack racing, is it a company that is fairly established in time attack, right? Like that they have been around that scene and they're providing performance parts or some other sort of part or service for this genre of racing? Or is it somebody new who's maybe wanting to get into that area? Maybe they've been in another area and they're wanting to expand, right? You know, so understanding what it is and what it is that the sponsor is wanting to do and why they are wanting to do it is important in understanding whether or not it's the right fit for you.
And you have to, and to your point, you really have to have those conversations, right? I really made it a point to try to ask questions of what is the target market we're trying to approach with this? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to get new people to understand what the product is? Are we trying to get people that know the product just more involved? What are we trying to do? And that helps you be able to talk to the customers and the people that come up to you. Also, when it comes down to it, don't be afraid to ask the sponsor for like materials, right? Like physical materials. It's amazing how we kind of forget about that, how everything's a digital marketplace and we must do it all on social media. But it is one of those things where maybe they print out hero cards and you sign them and hand them to people at an event. And that's something that's going to stick with them more so than a digital ad that posts up on social media for 2.5 seconds as they scroll through it, right? Definitely something that I think makes it a little bit more personal and means a little bit more to people. But, you know, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned a lot of like racing stuff when talking about sponsorships. Probably one of my most lucrative sponsors that I ended up having throughout my career was a vape company, which was very, very on brand for a Subaru.
It is.
But with that said, I mean,
it makes sense.
It was and that was one of the very few people where obviously at that juncture it really made sense for them to cut a check. But for me, that worked out great. But the pro and the con of that was for my team was also filled with a bunch of guys who vaped. So worked out for those guys. I don't vape. So people,
it's kind of hard to get a vape underneath your helmet as you're going down a straight, right?
Hey man, those Subaru guys know how to do it. but it's one of those things. Like for me, that was a very interesting sponsorship situation because me as a non-vapor, I didn't know anything about the product. I didn't know anything about anything besides like, yeah, it's on the side of my car. So at the end of the day, it wasn't a great fit. It didn't mesh with me. So like my pit crew guys, they could sit in the pits and slang it, dude. They could talk to people left and right and like tell them all about it. And someone could ask me and I'm like, never used it. Sorry. Like it just wasn't my thing. And that's where you have to be cautious. And I'll say this, like my car would have never been anything without that company's money, that influx of money that they gave me. But at the same time, that was also one of the major factors when that relationship failed. It failed in a very terrible way at the end because the communication fell apart. The owner, I was sending progress reports and like going back and forth, and well, I shouldn't say back and forth. I was sending a lot of stuff out and not getting anything in return. And then he felt that he wasn't getting anything in return. And so if your ROI, return on investment, is zero, or at least he felt it was zero, then they're not going to feel like they're going to keep up. They're going to drop the sponsorship. And that's something that, don't feel bad, because some relationships, some sponsorships are going to fail. The best thing you can do is try to understand why they failed so that you can do better next time. And I tried. I made the attempt to understand like his pros and cons and like this, that, and the other. But in the last like 6 months, the relationship just deteriorated to nothing, where I was sending emails and making phone calls and getting nothing in return. And then money promised never was delivered. And then it brings up a whole bag of worms of like, what the freaking hell's going on? But that was my situation. Yeah.
So since we're kind of talking about what is the right sponsor here, I want to break that down a little bit just for that particular. This seems like a pretty interesting case study. So I kind of want to break that down a little bit. But what was it when did you approach them? Did they approach you? And like, how did you sort of go through that process of figuring out that like this will be a good fit? And hopefully it wasn't like, oh, they're going to give us money, so yeah, it's a good fit, right? Like, what was sort of that process that you went through to figure out that, okay, yeah, let's move forward with this? And then, so I'm going to ask two questions here, and I'll try and keep you on track. So one, on the front side, right, when you were deciding to do this, what was the process you went through? And then at the end, in terms of this miscommunication, was there maybe some sort of miscommunication that what you were sending them isn't quite what they had, what their expectations were? Did maybe their expectations change? Maybe the answer is you're not really sure. You never could figure it out. But I'm just kind of wondering at the beginning and the end, what sort of happened there?
So it's an interesting story. So essentially, I was sponsored by Yimmy Sport Tuning. Always were a part of the car. And they had a customer come in, owned a Subaru. And he was looking around the lobby, and like he saw the car that we had in the lobby and in the back, and I guess started asking and talking questions with Paul from Yimmy Sport. And I get a call from Paul, and he's like, "Hey man, I got some guy who's a vape guy, and he's interested in sponsoring the car. Here's his information." So technically speaking, they approached us about a sponsorship. I got back to him, and initially it seemed like a great fitment, right? You had Subaru guy who was interested in cars, interested in modifying a Subaru, interested in sponsoring a race Subaru at Time Attack, and it seemed like an amazing fit that was, match made in heaven type stuff. And I went to their place where they produced it all. We had a lot of conversation. We flushed it all out. They wanted, because the big thing was, and this was where it got really interesting, is they wanted to be the primary sponsor on the car, the title sponsor. Okay. Which at the time, it was Yimmy Sport, obviously. And I told them from the get-go, I was like, hey, I'm letting you know, like, these guys, like, and I had to have, this was a hard conversation I had to have actually with Paul from Yimmy Sport, them being the title of sponsor of the car and how much work and effort that Paul did on the car. To me, it was a very hard conversation because I'm like, hey, Paul, this guy's interested in giving us cash. Are you willing to essentially like drop down a tier to accept this cash to elevate our car?
Yeah.
And, Paul was very gracious and understanding and saying like, hell yeah, dude, let's get this freaking money. So
it's hard to turn that down.
It was really awesome that we were able to make that happen without, because that could have easily been like okay, well, if that's going to happen, then you're going to pay me for my labor. You know what I mean? That could have easily been that type of situation really quickly. But we got it all going, signed all the checks, got everything rolling, and it started off really well in terms of like we're prepping, and this is like the same timeline where this is the first year we're prepping to go to Coda. We're all excited, this, that, and the other, finishing the car up. But let me roll back just a little bit. So this was also at the time when we were moving from street class to limited class, technically.
Okay.
And we told the guy in the very beginning, like, hey, I'm letting you know, this is going to be very slow rolling. We have to finish building the car. So, like, I want to say for, like, the first 3 to 6 months, it was just, like, us finishing the car. We didn't compete in anything. So I can understand from his perspective, the first, like, 3 to 6 months was, like, this is terrible. Like, nothing's happening. You're not running. We finally get the car
product.
out. Exactly. And at the, like, October timeframe, end of the year, we start getting the car out. And, you know, we ran into one problem. We thought it was really cool. We did a really cool livery on the car, and then we put chrome decals, and we thought this is gonna look baller, it's gonna look so cool. Yeah, we get it on track and you couldn't see any of the logos. It just looked terrible. Yep. So, you know, in the templates it all looked great. In reality, it looked like crap. So immediately we rip all that off and then redo all the stickers again, which cost money, cost energy, blah 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 blah. Did 2015 and like blew the car up at Super Lap, and essentially I think we finished 4th that year at Super Lap. Didn't really have a great showing. It wasn't like, you know, we came out as champions right out the gate and looked all cool. You know, it's like we built this car, got all this money from a sponsor, and then did nothing. And we took ownership of it. Yeah, and we took ownership of it and let them know, like, next year is going to be a better year, blah blah blah, like it'll be awesome. So we start into 2016. And we go to, like, Road Atlanta that year. And again, go to Road Atlanta, finish 4th again. But still doing other stuff and still doing well. Starting out 2016, actually pretty good. Car's running. Everything's looking really good. Go to Road Atlanta. Don't blow the car up. You know, everything's hunky-dory. But then midway through the year, all of a sudden, it's this weird taper off where used to be a lot of conversation between me and the guy, and then he ends up like selling his Subaru, kind of getting out of Subarus, and then he stops communicating through text and email. And one thing I noticed, and this is always a pet peeve of mine, like I'm sending a ton of marketing material. I'm sending videos and pictures and updates. And I always did every event, no matter, you know, win or lose, I do a full recap of the event, send it to every sponsor with videos and pictures, so they have every bit of information from that event that I possibly could. And wasn't getting a response back. Their social media didn't even show that we were a part of them, essentially. And literally, like, we were trying everything under the sun. Like, my guys were... like we were taking picture of like the little vape juice bottles and putting them on the splitter and like taking pictures and like just trying to do anything we can product placement wise to make it, you know, be a part of our situation. But one thing, this is a big problem I have with sponsors in general. It's not reciprocal. Your job as a driver, team owner, this, that, and the other isn't just to pump their product. They need to reciprocate that in taking the images and videos that you send them and put them out as well. Now, understand they also might sponsor hundreds of people, so they're not going to post hundreds of posts, and it might take them a while to post you. But especially when you do something really well, you have a higher level of expectation that you're going to get something essentially back. But to end that story, it goes into that realm of no communication back or forth. I'd set up deals where every event we go to, we get paid. And doing an event, waiting for a check's never coming. And I'm like, what's going on? Can you get back to me? Can you give me a call? Can you email me back? Finally, I get like an email that's like, hey, bro, this isn't working out. Sorry, you know, you're not doing enough for us. Have a good life type email.
It sounds more like a breakup than a...
Yeah. Literally, like, it was one of those, and it just literally, I mean, I won't lie, it infuriated me.
It's you. It's not me.
Yeah. And it was just one of those moments of like, well, why didn't you have conversations with me? Why didn't you?
Right.
Because I was very adamant in the beginning to lay down expectations. And my expectations were well laid out in my sponsorship package of when I was going to post, how many times I was going to post per week with them involved, tagging them, hashtags with them, in terms of like event coordination and like posting about them at events. Everything was very well orchestrated and told about what was going to happen. Now, like we talked about previously, the big kicker there is, was racing and the Subaru part of their marketing strategy? And I think the answer simply is no. My program was something that the owner just had on a whim, and I'm not trying to down any like small business owners or anything like that, but I think it was just something that he thought was cool.
Yep.
And wanted to be a part of, and that's fine. But he dove so deep into it that it was simply a situation where it's like, what were you expecting to get out of it? And that kind of draws us to that next level, right? Where you go, what is the expectation? I think setting expectations, and as I spoke a minute ago about, right, like you have to set expectations on both sides of the fence. And one of the biggest things that I've coached a lot of guys in like how to approach sponsorships and like how to do them correctly. And one of the biggest things I always tell people is make clear and concise agreements on what you're going to give and get. And never falter on what you're going to give. Because that is probably one of the biggest misconceptions is, like we said way earlier, right? It's, oh, you're just going to give me money, or you're just going to give me product and I just do nothing. And that's not what people want. Now, the burdens that come along with that can be a bit overwhelming, and that's where people really fail, in my opinion. So to end the my sponsorship debacle failure, right? At the end of the day, it just kind of collapsed within itself, and then we went back to Yummy Sport being the title sponsor, and we moved on. He didn't ask for anything back, but at the same time, it was a real big lesson for me, where that was that moment where I went, let me sit back and understand that relationship and see where it failed. And where I saw that it failed is the strategies, the marketing strategies between the two did not coexist. There wasn't a mutual beneficial relationship. I gained from him through money, and I made the attempt to gain from him via, promoting his product. Now, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And that's where failures are going to happen. And, could there have been a better way to do it? Could we have meshed in a different way, or how? Probably 100%. But you live and you learn. So with that said, not all partnerships are money or parts. So what are some of the partnerships that you would see would be beneficial that are not money or parts?
Yeah. So, one of the things which, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see I'm wearing you can kind of see it. Let me get it there. An MCS suspension shirt. Full disclosure, I'm not sponsored by MCS, although I do have their suspension on my car.
But if they want to at any time, they can come on board.
That's right. But like one of the things with a suspension, as most people, and I think there are other types of these companies or other types of these technologies where, sure, getting the part is only like 50% of the equation at best, right? Getting a set of two-way remote reservoir MCS dampers is fantastic, but if you don't know how to use them, they are you might as well have just bought a non-adjustable suspension, right?
Yeah.
But that is where, you may also be seeking their guidance, their advice, someone that you can call up and say, hey, can you help me set this car up? Can you give me some guidance on, compression, rebound, nitrogen pressures and the remote reservoirs, right? Like all of these things can be very beneficial. Actually, the advice may even be more beneficial than the actual product itself. I could also think of something like a tuner, right? Like getting a tuner on board to help you set your car up, especially if you've got something like you've done an engine swap, you've added a turbo, you've done some crazy things, right? Where
or you're on a Subaru and you need to be tuned every other minute.
Exactly, right? Like having someone on board to where you can send data logs to them, maybe over the course of a weekend, maybe they're actually there at the track with you. Maybe they are remote, and especially nowadays, you can send them a log. They can check it out, make a couple tweaks, send it back to you. You load it up, and now you're ready to go. Now you've got a new log for your ECU. You're ready to go. So, it's not just parts, but definitely advice and I guess that could also sort of go to, is it the right fit that we just talked about, but also, working with someone and the follow-up and the continued relationship after, that it's not just parts. Maybe it's their advice, it's their experience that you really want access to. I think that's something that absolutely people should think about. What about you? Anything else?
Well, I'm just going to tack on to that. I mean, my program as a whole would have never succeeded without Paul. Paul was an absolute part that without him, the program was dead from Jumpstart. I mean, he provided never-ending amounts of labor for the car on top of like the ability for him to understand what a Subaru is doing and how it's doing it. The Subaru whisperer himself. It's definitely one of those things where he needed to be there at all times. And he'll even say this, the race program was a huge benefit to himself, right? Like he learned a lot by going to the track and being a part of that race team. So he gained from that as well, which was awesome. Like it's always easy for me to say like I gained from him easily. But it's cool that, he has said like it was a beneficial thing for him to be able to come out to the track and to learn, how that all works out and what the real deal, what happens, and the tuning side of the house happens for those cars in those environments. Other things, obviously, that I would say are very important are the media portions. I had great friends. I made a ton of friends. My good friend Colin, he came out and he was at times I paid him when I could, but sometimes couldn't. But he was able to come out and create these amazing videos, and I even had a buddy Zong who did it for me one time as well. He also had a lot of Evos that caught on fire, but one of those things where I had guys that were great marketing guys, that were great media guys, that came on and helped me out at times, was a part of the team, and that was instrumental, right? Like them being able to help me create a video when I'm busy driving and trying to make sure, this, that, and the other, and they're there putting the cameras on the car, interviewing me. Some of my greatest, and it's funny because I say greatest, but some of the videos that I can look back on now and watch and really like love to watch because they involve just talking about it. Like I can't say that enough to the guys coming up, is take that time. Like you feel stupid as hell in the beginning, especially, but just flipping that camera around and just talking into it and just talking it out, it's something that you'll be able to use in your videos, and it's something that people love to hear is your own insight during the event. Event recaps, when you're talking about it after the fact, it's a different emotion. In the moment, the emotion can be so raw, and like there's definite times where that emotion was captured, and you love having that, whether it be success of greatness or failure, and it's good to remember the both. great racing drivers have, always said really enjoy the wins because they're much fewer than the losses, because for obvious reasons we lose a hell of a lot more than we're going to win. But that's probably a big thing, is I would definitely seek out any bit of media. And I'm not going to lie, like a lot of people can do media nowadays, can make good videos, so on and so forth. But really find the guys that know how to like tell a story. I think that is like a really good attribute that's really hard to find. But that's something that I would strive for. I always say the same thing, and I always say, if only I was essentially starting my time attack career out now versus then, besides the fact of being older and lazier, omit those parts. But the whole thing of in the past, I go, man, if I would have only captured these moments, if I would have just recorded us working until 5 a.m, and I would have recorded and just put together like all the good times that we had, and the funny stuff that went on in the shop, and all those interesting moments that we got to experience, but we didn't get to share that with anybody. I always go, man, this would be YouTube gold, because it's exactly what people want to see. They want it. I mean, I hate to say it, but they want to see you struggle. But they want to see you struggle and then achieve. So that's where finding that media guy that's willing to come out and help you out and be there for you can really make that big difference. So let's jump into the next topic here. So when we start talking about sponsorships, what's the burden? What is the burden that can actually be something that hurts you more with a sponsorship than a help?
Well, there's no doubt that when you have a sponsor come on board, I mean, that is a great thing. That is going to be a benefit to your project. But as we've said, it usually does not come for free, and it can add another layer of stress that you haven't really dealt with before, because especially if right, I mean, for every sponsor that comes on board, it depends on exactly what they want out of the program. But that may be, okay, well, I had one sponsor and I was just sort of focused on one, or creating one set of videos or pictures or social media posts, but now I've got 5, and now I've got 5 more, now I've got 5 to deal with, and that only increases the amount of time that you have to, or the amount of attention that you have to provide to all of these sponsors now, right? And so, I mean, imagine some of these bigger teams, right? They have a lot that they have to attend to. And so there's definitely a lot of increased stresses that come with that. And it's oftentimes, you don't have to deal with it. I mean, you deal with it a little bit at the track, but this is also things that have to be planned out and have to be scheduled, have to be thought about. And so it just adds like time sort of away from the track, away from the car, even in terms of, okay, who are my sponsors? What are my obligations to those sponsors? And when and how am I going to fulfill those? And that doesn't include time when you're wrenching on the car. That doesn't include time when you're driving the car. You're now adding additional time commitments beyond prepping and driving the car. And so I think those are some of the things where the sponsorships become, I hate to say more of a burden, but they become they add more stress to your program, to your life, to what you're trying to do. No doubt about it. And you have to figure out the best ways to handle that and incorporate that into your prep, into your weekend. For sure, you have to kind of figure out how all of that is going to fit in.
Yeah, and I mean, I can relate on that, because for me, I mean, as we were talking about before, right, you're trying to find the ones that mesh well, and you're trying to find the ones that fit in your program, and you're really trying to work those guys in. And with that usually comes some sort of like tiering system, and obviously, you segment it down to, people that are just giving you like $10, blah, 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 all the way up to, giving you $100,000 type deal. But at the end of the day, as you stated, like more stress, commitments. You have to now you have to meet the requirements, because now you've structured these deals, these sponsorship agreements, and sometimes those agreements come in sticker placements. They come in how many posts that you have to do per month. They can go to how many events you're going to do in a year. So when you start talking about, and this is a big part of my stress at the time with the Subaru, was when you make all these sponsorship agreements and you say, we're going to run 7 events this year. You blow the car up on the first event. You don't know when you can get it back running. At that juncture, you're really at the mercy of the sponsors. And I'll be completely honest that most of them completely understand the grassroots motorsports portion of this. And they don't have a huge expectation that you're just going to instantly bring this thing back up from the dead and you have 7 spare motors and, you're $1 million program. They understand what this means. But you made promises. So you're trying to deliver on those promises. And so maybe you get creative with media posts or so on and so forth. And that's one of those attributes that create that stress and that anxiety that can come along with it if you're a person that really wants to meet your commitments, right? It's about goal setting at that juncture. You set these goals and you try to work your goals in with them so that your goals are meeting on the same level. You're trying to say, hey, I'm gonna win World Time Attack. I'm gonna win GTA Finals. I'm gonna win Super Lap Battle this year. Well, when you fall completely short, you want to have a good understanding of what, where, why, and how. And like you talked about, right? Time commitments. So I know for me, I would literally get done with an event. Obviously, we generally get done on a Sunday. Monday afternoon, because obviously most of us go to work. So I go to work on Monday, get off from work, and instantly be like editing my video from that event. I'm contacting the videographers and the photographers at the event to try to get video and stuff that I needed to get from them as soon as possible. Because for those guys, that could take weeks for them to get everything wrapped up and edited and sent over to you. So it's like just trying to get all that, and then obviously just trying to sit down and like write my event recap and so on and so forth. And for me, that was obviously a huge deal. I'd spend essentially Monday through Wednesday every day after work, or maybe sometime during work, maybe. And just
I won't tell anybody.
Getting that stuff.
Nobody's gonna know.
Getting that stuff written out and ready and out to sponsors. And I won't lie. I mean, it was a huge distribution, and everyone got the same thing. In terms of like event recaps, I kept it very simple in that regard, where everyone got the same event recap. And what I would generally try to do is, throughout the event recap, I would try the major sponsors, and then I would pick and choose from minor sponsors to say, like, let's just say I had a tire sponsor and they were giving me 10% off tires. I might throw a blurb in there and be like, tires were fantastic this event, we ran them at this PS. You try to throw information in there to give them, like you talked about before, just giving them information and trying to get them knowledge about their product and how you're using it, right? So little things like that, maybe questions, and then from there you can drill down and like send individual emails about like questions about products or something of that nature, whatever the case may be. But that's something where that's a burden. That is a burden that driver or team owner or whoever has. And it's not necessarily a bad burden, but it's something that you have to take on. And people genuinely think that like getting a sponsor means I got free stuff or I got free money and I don't have to do anything for it. And I'm gonna jump right into our next topic, and that's simply when to say no to a sponsor. So have you found yourself in that position yet, where you had someone approach you, or you went after a sponsor, but it just didn't align, and you said no to them, or the offer wasn't good?
Yeah. I have not been in that situation yet, but I can easily see where that could be an issue, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think. I mean, I can imagine, especially from your perspective of a driver, if you've done your homework, you've identified a potential partner that you want to approach. Maybe you've even you've been able to meet them. Maybe you've met them at another event. Maybe they had a tent up, and they had some product there, and you were able to kind of chat with them. You had some interest in them, and you've sort of done your homework and said, okay, I think I want to approach the sponsor, and it may turn out to where like the demands that they're requiring just aren't going to really fit with your program. And I think that is something super hard to do, especially the earlier you are in your sort of motorsports career, or where you are in your progress, because
I think you make a good point there. Where you are in your motorsports career, with wherever you are in your progress, is going to depict a lot. Because advice I give to guys in the early onset of their career is you have to prove yourself. You're going to have to take some of the not so great deals. And when I say not so great, I'm going to definitely, throw some shade here. But it's like sponsors now, this whole game that they're playing is like, hey, Kilgore, I'm going to give you this intake. I'm going to give you a whole 10% off, or 20, maybe 30% off of this intake, and you can buy it. And you're like, okay, what's the catch? And they're like, oh, well, you have to send us all these you have to do an installation video, you have to do pictures, you have to post us twice a month. We need event recaps from every event you go to. You have to now go to 3 car shows and 6 racing events this year. And it's like, what the hell? You just asked me for how much time and energy for 30% off? And those are the deals that you have to go and just say no to. That is a no-win situation for you. You are going to expend tenfold what you're going to get back. You're better off to just buy the intake flat out than get the 30% off, unless you're just looking to add a name to your car.
Right.
So, but those are the deals that I've definitely seen sponsors throw out there, and I'll tell people at that juncture, say no. Now, if it's, we're going to give you 30% off, can you make an install video? And that's it? Okay, I can deal with that. You're going to install the part either way. Hell, for your channel, for your own, marketability, you're probably going to create a video for it anyways if you're smart. So it's really no skin off your back. So those type of deals, they make sense. And that's when you have to look at that. Like, if they're asking too much, it doesn't make sense. Also, things where if the goals aren't aligning, obviously, like I spoke before about my vape sponsor, I could have identified that way earlier if I wasn't probably a little too money blind and said this really isn't going to make any sense in the long haul. Now, giving myself a little credit, I definitely thought, like, Subaru vape, this goes hand in hand. We'll throw it on our car. He'll post it all over his website. We'll both get a bunch of media exposure. This will be great. So I definitely was a little blind to that marketing aspect of it. But
yeah, but I mean, it made sense at the time. I don't think that there's anything too terribly wrong with that. But I agree with your point of there are some times where you have to just simply, say no. It just doesn't really make sense. Or as we said earlier, right? Like, you're like, yeah, I just, I don't really think I would put this part on my car unless they were offering it to me, right? Like, what is that really bringing you? as well as, you know, like what is, and I think it's reasonable, and I don't think that you should be, I don't think you as a driver should be bashful and sort of looking at the company. I mean, who is the company? Like, do you already know them? You probably do, right? But like, what are their values in terms of, you know, can you sort of see like, you know, how they treat, like what are some of their posts? How do they treat other companies? I'm going to say this, I'm not going to call them out, but there is a company that they make aerodynamic devices, and they try and troll other companies. And you know, the way that the post, you know, and the way that their posts kind of go, and some of the things that they've said, it's just, to me, like, I just don't, it just rubs me the wrong way. And I think that even if they were to approach me, I would just be like, you know, like, I just don't really like some of the things, and some of the things you guys have said, and some of the posts you make, right? Like, I just think they're out of line, right? Like, and I think that, you know what, like, there is nothing wrong if you just don't really like that company, or you just don't really like the way that they market themselves, for you to say, like, you know what, like, I'd rather try and go a different route.
Well,
and there's nothing
and to
wrong
tag
with that.
on to that, I mean, how they treat their customers. Because
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, you know, I've definitely experienced some situations where people have gone to me about a product that a company that I was sponsored with, in an agreement with, and they came to me over their product failing. And when they come to you and they're like, hey man, this product blows, you're sponsored by them, what the hell? Why are you helping them sponsor crap products? And I remember this vividly because in the end it all worked out, but, you know, took that person and then took the company and got them to actually have communication, because, again, communication is the biggest flaw of human existence, and actually got them communicating. Next thing you know, just like that, it's resolved, because it was just a pure and simple, like, oh, well, this needs to be, oh, you installed this incorrectly. Here, we'll just send you a new one. You can install it correctly, and then it'll be good to go. Simple stuff. But it's amazing how, like, that all got lost, and it was just, I can't believe you're sponsored by these guys. These guys are crap. And then it, you know, gets blown up. And to the company's fault, they didn't reply back to the guy's initial email, and he just sent one email and just gave up on it and said they're terrible. But it's those type of things, right? Like, you have to be very cautious, because you are now an extension of them. They are now an extension of you. And that's where having to understand what that company's, you know, philosophy and guidelines, and, you know, how they treat people as a whole makes a huge difference. Are they part of the tuner community? Are they not? Are they someone that doesn't care? Do they, you know, there's tons of companies out there that create a bunch of good products, but some of them actually care about if something breaks, are they going to stand by their product? I mean, just to give a shout out to SPL. So a competitor went to Colorado and went to Ascend and had a lower control arm break. And, you know, one of those situations where the control arm broke, and he's like, dude, I need a control arm. He hit me up, and he's like, can you help me out? Do you know anybody? Got him in touch with a guy, got him control arms. But the bigger thing is that at the end of the day, SPL came through, actually ended up finding out that what happened was the control arm that he got was actually a prototype control arm that was never meant to be sold. And it accidentally got sold, and SPL sent him a brand new set of control arms. Now, granted, does that really help him in the fact that he lost, you know, time on track, and, you know, the alignment got screwed and blah? Yes, all that got lost. But it's great to see a company stand by their product enough to help the guy out and, you know, admit to him, like, hey, this was not supposed to be sold. Sorry about that. You could see the difference in the thickness of the materials and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, definitely one of those situations where that was cool to see. And that's those are sponsors that you want to be a part of, right? You want a sponsor like SPL because now you know that they stand by their product and are going to be there for you if it's good, bad, or indifferent, and help the customer out. So that's some of the most important things.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll shout out SPL as well, and I know. So I had their full set of control arms on my 135i that I was tracking, and at the same time, like, nobody really makes the same product that they make.
Oh, really?
In terms of these full control arm replacements, and so when we were at CODA at Super Lap Battle this year, Alan from SPL, like, I wasn't sponsored by them, but I liked their product. I think it's a really good product. And he came by, right? And he's like, saw you had the stickers on the car. You've got your M4, like, how things going, right? Like, chatting me up, wanting to see things. And then even brought by, like, a little swag bag, of, like, some stuff.
Nice.
But they were there at the event. And I also knew, I felt comfortable that if something were to happen in the event and I broke a control arm, I knew that if I went to them and said, like, hey, like, something broke. Now granted, they're only a couple hours away. They're in Texas, but well, let me say this. Actually, before the event, they sent out like an email. I think it was an email, or they got in touch with us some way and said, hey, to all the guys that we know who run SPL parts, we're going to be at Super Lap Battle. Let us know, let us know what you'll be running. Let us know, if there's anything that we can bring, because we'll be sure to kind of have some spares or some other stuff so that if something happens, we'll have you covered, which was super awesome, right? Like, not even people who were necessarily sponsored by them, but they wanted to have parts there. And, I know that they have, I'll bring it up. I know that they've had some issues, last year where the bolt, like the bolt configuration they were using was having some problems. So they had a couple failures. They were having a few failures. They fixed the problem. They owned it. They said, hey, we've seen this issue. We've made some adjustments, and we've sort of done a reconfiguration of the bolt. And let us, if you have one of these older designs, let us know. We'll take care of it. All this kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Right? Like,
they're just standing by their product and getting it back out and making sure that people are well taken care of. And sorry, I'll mention his name, Chris Matthews. He's got his Instagram handle 2022 Boombox. So he's the guy with the Subaru that ended up having the issue. And but he was well taken care of again by SPL. So again, just trying to jump into this a little bit. So kind of in that same realm of, saying no to sponsors, I think something that's people tend to forget is we all look at, like, these big names and, like, all these huge YouTubers or, all this other big stuff, big on Instagram, so on and so forth. But I think something that we've really tapped into in the last few years is small influencers, essentially large influence, right? Small influencers, large influence, and that's something that we've touched on in our conversations that we've had. It's you might only have 1,000 followers, but out of those 1,000 followers, those are people who really care about your opinion, right? They really, really care about your opinion. So when you run these parts and you say that they do X, Y, and Z and they do them well, those lead to sales. Now, does that warrant a company giving you $10,000? Probably not. But when they do stuff like send you a free set of coilovers or a free set of control arms or a free set of tires, or give you something off of those products, they are getting something in return. And so I think that's something that people really need to play up to that level that it really should be at. is, you don't need a huge 10,000, 20,000, 80,000, like, because I'm going to tell you right now, there's plenty of people that I follow that have over 100,000, subscribers or followers or whatever you want to call them. And let me tell you, they pump a product and I'm like, I wouldn't buy that product. Just because,
Sure.
Just because someone says it's a good product doesn't mean it's a good product. But if you trust them, if you trust their opinion, that's where, for me, that was always my thing, right? Is I said, I will not be sponsored by anybody that I don't believe in their product. Which I know is very counterintuitive to the whole, like, I got sponsored by a vape company that I don't vape. But my friend said it was great, so I just went off of what they said.
Yeah.
But
I get it.
But it's one of those things. Like, I find it interesting, and something, we'll talk probably in a later post. But it's one of those things, like, people like AEM and Whiteline and, like, a lot of these companies that are, like, in my opinion, like, OG to tuner culture, that just haven't, like, it's like a new age of people that are out there right now. And they just aren't gaining the traction that I would expect. Like, when I think of sway bars, I think of Whiteline. Like, when I think of intakes, I think of AEM, because that's what I ran on my Civic, and that's what I ran on my Subaru, and that's what I ran, like those type of things. And it's very interesting what we have going on now, where, like, people are more inclined to buy from, like, more like boutique style tuner shops or something of that nature. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, for you, BMW World, that's like Turner Motorsports, right? Like,
yep.
It's like, how many parts
Turner,
do you have?
Beamer World, yeah.
Beamer World, yeah. Like, those are companies that, like, stick out in my head in the BMW aspect, and I'm like, from a time attack situation, I'm like, I don't see a bunch of guys running a bunch of their parts, which is interesting to me. I would have thought that those guys, with their solidification in that market space, that it'd be higher, but it's interesting.
Well, I mean, so from that perspective, in terms of BMW, I think Beamer World has probably done one of the best jobs. SPL has also done a really good job. I mean, if you're talking about a track car and someone is going to run aftermarket control arms, they are probably going to be running SPL.
I mean, believe
there
me,
are
I
a couple
want
other
to run SPL bushings on my Mustang. I just can't figure out which ones to put on.
Sure. Yeah. No, I get. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's where being able to actually get a hold of them, right, and actually talk to them and have a good relationship and customer service really pays dividends. So at the last Super Lap battle, I do think, at least for the F82 series, which is like 2014 to like 2021, 2022, for that series of M3s, M4s, there were a couple guys there who were running the Beamer World Swan Neck wing. I think at least one of the guys was running their front splitter and maybe some canards. But they've done pretty well with that M4 platform. They're now getting into, which I think is interesting, they're now getting into the M2, the new M2 platform, which is the same thing Jackie Ding is running. Oh. I know Amir and RS Future, I think they went with the M4. They had that black M4. But I haven't seen a lot of that car lately. I think they ran it like 2 years ago. I saw some development with it when it first came out, but I haven't really seen it lately. I'm just making the observation. And I have not been able to talk to them as to why they've chosen the M2 over the M3, M4. Really, the M4 chassis about the same weight. I think you're talking maybe 80 or 100 pounds different in the M2, it being lighter. But anyway, yeah, I mean, there are definitely some companies who seem to have done better than others. And I think this also goes to there. I think that there's a little bit of a phenomenon going on, and I don't know to what extent. I just know that there is a little bit that I have heard out there in terms of, well, I think you're seeing it now with like Hoonigan and some of these other brands where these brands are getting bought out by larger companies, and they're losing some of their ability to kind of go after some of these smaller drivers and some of these smaller markets, which, as you said, I think may be a little bit of a shame, because you can have a small, you may be a small influencer, but you can have a pretty big impact. I think sort of to what you were saying, if I look at a lot, I mean, I don't have a huge Instagram following. You can find me at mkilgore_09, and you will see that it is all BMW content, right?
Yeah.
So like the people who follow me are following me for like BMW track content. But to your point, if a company is interested in marketing to that group, then you don't need some huge influencer. You don't need someone with 100,000 followers, right? I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't know who has, but let's say that there's a driver who does time attack, or let's just say RP968, probably the craziest and greatest time attack car out there
on the planet
currently.
right now.
Right? Yeah. If they were to put something out about, I mean, it would have to be something that's universal to all cars, right? But even to that extent, I still think that there's like, what applicability does that have to me, right? Okay, maybe you're talking about like oil, right? Like, oh, we run, I don't know what oil they run, but let's say, oh, we run oil from X company, and we've been working with them, and it's been protecting our engine, our gearbox, our differential, blah blah blah, whatever. Okay, like maybe I might be interested to look at it, because if it can work for them, maybe it could work for me. But right, like if they're talking about some crazy suspension, I think that thing probably has a bespoke suspension setup on it anyway. But right, like I mean, at some point you're getting to an influencer that has no applicability to others. Whereas for me, right, if you want to reach other BMW track people, right, a small influencer is a great way to go, because, oh, he's running MCS, he's having, he's having success, he's running SPL, he's running whatever exhaust, whatever intake, whatever spark plugs, right? Like those are things that I can put directly into my car.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it, right? Is applicability. And again, you go back into the trust factor, right? So one thing that works really well with the small influencers is the trust factor. We trust the people that we know, we talk to. So when they say it works for them, we believe that it actually works for them. So those are the big things that kind of jump out at me. I mean, it's like you see it. I was watching drifting earlier, and one of the things that you look at and you see is Royal Purple, right? Royal Purple's out there, and they're saying, hey, we put this in our engine, and like you said, there's applicability there, and then now we trust the driver and say, hey, look, they use this, it must be good, I could probably use it in my vehicle, so on and so forth. There's always going to be stuff like that. And then just like anything else, I think I also go down the road of what used to be, so Garrett Motion now used to do an enormous, like Yuki just used to just put this like crazy like marketing thing out there where they were giving away a lot of turbos, right? That was kind of like their thing. You hit them up and say, hey, I do time attack, or I do this, and they give you a turbo. Be like, here, put it on your car. Sponsored, boom, just like that. But one of the reasons why, and I think it worked amazingly well, is how many guys did you see with Garrett turbos? Garrett turbos got synonymous with turbos, right? Yeah, so if you're a drag race guy, it's probably precision. I was a Borg Warner guy, which at the time when I was doing Borg Warner, they were actually a superior turbo. Now they've kind of caught up to each other and they're kind of one and the same. But it was a superior turbo, but they had a very less aggressive marketing strategy where they only sponsored a few of the like top tier guys, and that was about it. So when you looked around the pits, you saw a ton of Garrett, not a lot of Borg. But it was very interesting in the two different strategies and watching them play out. And that's just an observation again. Like, I don't know what the real marketing strategies were, but that's just what it seemed to be. And I think both of them worked in their own ways and had strengths and weaknesses to both. So, but that's kind of what you have to look at, is there's a ton of different ways that sponsors can play the game. There's a ton of different ways that the influencers, the drivers, the teams, that we can play the game. And I think at the end of the day, as long as we're both working down the road of finding a mutually beneficial path, that is actually where you're going to find yourself in the best situation overall. And if you continually to think in that rationale, I 100% believe that you'll be successful in your sponsorship endeavors. Again, I can't stress it enough. Say no. If it doesn't make sense, if the terms are just egregious, say no. It doesn't make sense, walk away from it. Also, I'm going to say this, don't always be looking in the motorsports realm. Look outside of motorsports. Look at some people that can help you with media. Look at things people can help you with advice and labor. That's also a huge portion of it. You need somebody to help you while you're at the track. Big part of that. At the same time, again, for me, it was vape juice stuff, right? But for you, it could be something completely different. There's tons of accessories and like random things that people need for cars that, guess what? They want to be a part of this industry. They want to be a part of this game. So don't pigeonhole yourself into just thinking about performance parts because I'm a performance guy and I'm doing performance motors. Like, really think outside the box. I mean, literally you can find yourself a car charger company and they might be all over you, right? And they're willing to pay you all sorts of money. You have a car, it's applicable. It might work out. So those are the type of things. Don't hold yourself back, but definitely keep seeking out these sponsorships. Definitely, if this is something that you have a desire to continue to move forward, at the end of the day, I hate to say it, but sponsorships are kind of an inevitable thing in motorsports, and you're going to need them. So in Time Attack, they're absolutely out there. They're there and ready for you, but you have to be the diligent go-getter that you need to be. And then get out there and be a good person with it. Get back to them. Give what you've promised. And then with that, success will come your way. So we really appreciate you guys sticking with us. We know we talk, we're long-winded, all those other good things. Keep listening. This is the Perfect Lap Podcast with Kilgore and Jager, signing out.